So 10:30. I think the recording has started again. Thank you so much, Robin. So we're going to jump into our Q4 update. As I always mention, this is his numbers have not been reviewed through our annual report process. So please note they are still rough estimates. Of course, we have a really good idea where the numbers are at, but they haven't been fully vetted. So these could change a little bit by the time we submit our annual report to the Conservation Advisory Group, and that will be in May. I think May 1st is when we need to have it to CAG. So, having added that caveat, I will say this data is pulled through December, and I'll let Bradey go ahead and provide our commercial highlights, if you would, Bradey.
Sure. So as you see on the screen, the commercial industrial program achieved 266,945 therms, about 69% of the overall goal for 2020. This was obviously a bit of a disappointment. Some of it we expected in terms of the slowdown from COVID. Some things have been delayed because of that. Some other planning and projections that we had made going into the year were impacted by COVID, and other things we just didn't necessarily anticipate. One bright spot that we had on the commercial program is we actually saw an increase in standard terms. Carrie mentioned trying to avoid the boom or bust, and the biggest way we've done that in the last 4 years on the commercial industrial side is by building up the base of standard or prescriptive terms that are achieved throughout the year, so that it wasn't necessarily program achieved goal or didn't achieve goal or came close based on one large custom project coming through. Or something like that. So in one way you can look at it and say, well, because a large custom project did not come through, the program did not achieve goal, but we've steadily seen that increase in standard terms year over year. So this year was about a 4%, or 2020, excuse me, was about a 4% increase in terms of standard terms achieved over 2019. We did talk a little bit about the slowdown due to COVID. We have, had some unique challenges in Washington State in what was deemed essential and what was not deemed essential in terms of construction, and how on the commercial side in particular that did impact some sectors. It also improved other sectors, and we talked a little bit about that in the last quarterly meeting in October. We actually saw some school projects which were expected to close in end of Q3 or beginning of Q4, or later in Q4, actually close in Q3. We had some more that may have been 2021 projects, but did close in Q4 in 2020. So we saw a little bit of an increase in our school projects, but we also have a solid foundation for 2021. So I know we'll talk about 2021 a little bit later. But any questions specific to the final numbers or, the pseudo final numbers until we obviously finalize and verify all those? Great. Anything more you'd like to add, Monica, on the numbers for 2020?
Not specific to 2020, I don't believe. Were you going to address the November question from Andrew next, or was that part of that?
Yeah, so specifically diving into, there was a significant drop in terms of our projection as a program. We were projecting right around somewhere between 70 and 75% since we started impacting or putting the numbers that were impacted by COVID. And we saw a significant drop in November. Directly tied to two projects which we were expected to see closed in November, but did not. One of them was a school project which actually completed in December, and then another one was a large insulation project. And actually there's 3 projects which were impacted by a COVID outbreak with one of the contractors who had planned that work. So all of those projects are now going to be 2021 projects. One of them is close to complete. One of them is about 30% complete, and another one should start here in the next 2 weeks or so. So we saw the direct impact of COVID with one of the contractors who was doing some work over in Zone 3 in Eastern Washington. So that kind of explains a little bit about the drop in the projections for November, or results in November, and the final numbers for 2020. The program looks at the year as a whole, how to achieve goal, increase in standard terms, increase in custom terms, and so on. But then specifically when it comes to projecting 1 month out, we look at specifically identified projects that we expect to close in that month. So we'll continue to use that forecasting moving forward. Maybe try to be a bit more conservative in these times with what we expect to close, but that is kind of our projection moving forward, or looking back and our projection moving forward.
Do you have a ballpark idea of what those 3 projects, what savings those 3 projects, or actually I guess it's 4, the school project and the 3 installations, how big were those?
Yeah, the school project was around 10,000 therms, and the 3 installation projects I think combined were about 12 or 13,000 therms, if I remember correctly. I know one in particular was 8,000. So the large project, which was expected to close in that time, or in November, was around 8,000 therms.
Thanks.
Yep. Any other questions?
So that's good information and data to have. I appreciate you offering it up, Bradey. I think it would be helpful to continue kind of diving into 2020 and maybe parsing out the data a little bit and looking at, like, were there specific zones that I guess saw bigger fall off than others, specific like industries. I know certainly some of them, like restaurants, performance venues, those types of places, anywhere people gather, but any other types of, like, trying to kind of quantify how specific industries were impacted in your in Cascade service territory, to kind of document not making the target for this year.
Absolutely, and I'll address one thing that you mentioned earlier with regard to measures and comparing year over year. We do that pretty regularly, but I think 2020 will be an interesting dive because, again, we, as a program, saw an increase in standard terms, but a decrease in custom projects and custom terms. So again, that's somewhat to be expected, as some of those larger projects, typically require more of an investment, more planning, and COVID directly impacts the planning and that go into typically large custom projects. And at the same time, we have a large custom project that we've shared with the CAG that is expected to close, as Philip mentioned, in Q1, and represents more than 100% of the 2020 goal, and it was expected to close in 2020, but again, some delays, and will be significantly impactful in our 2021 goals.
And may I ask, Andrew, are you looking for that as an update in for the CAG in general, or in the annual report? I think we were planning on putting a more in-depth review, like you were saying, by measure type, as a result of COVID in the annual report. But we can get it a little earlier if that's what you need.
I think it definitely should be in the annual report. I think it would be useful to see a little bit beforehand, but we can maybe talk offline a little bit about kind of timing of how that might shake out.
Okay.
Bradey, since you brought up the really big project, any specific update on that at this point?
Yeah, actually, got an update yesterday. The project's about 80% complete, so it does pencil in and plan accordingly to complete in Q1, as was mentioned by Philip and myself. But that project is going well. As I mentioned, there were some delays early, some delays middle. They're not expecting any more delays, but that is on an essential business. So, any further slowdowns or shutdowns or changes in terms of essential or non-essential business, I don't think will be impacted by, will impact that project. We had this is in there, the sample outreach from December. The commercial industrial program did a project at a customer down in Richland, a bakery that does some really cool and creative. It's a couple of sisters who started this bakery a few years ago, and went in pre-COVID, planning to make some updates. Completed the updates. Some of them were pre-COVID, some of them were post, but really did an amazing job of a whole building solution, which we'll talk a little bit about how that factors into 2021. But it was really emblematic of, as a program, what can be done and the impact that it has, particularly on small business. They wrote us a very a great email, which really highlights and for me, motivates me and reminds me of how important the work is that we do. And so we had reached out to them, and so that was kind of our holiday outreach to the commercial industrial team, and it's the piece you see on the screen right now. So I want to thank everyone for all the work that you do and we do, and hopefully this is a reminder as well of the impact that we have, not just on these large businesses that make multi-million-dollar investments, but also on the small businesses who make smaller investments, but it has a real impact on their bottom line, and that the check and our program in general inspires the right type of work to be done. And it was just a really neat opportunity to share it with the customers.
Yeah, I can only echo that, Bradey. It's very well phrased, and it's nice to see the actual impact on the customer base, right? We can hear about it, but anecdotally, when you get a note from an actual customer saying, this is what this rebate did, this is how we were not only able to increase the efficiency, but especially in this COVID realm, how we were able to maintain our status quo and continue business. I think that's really telling.
Yeah, and this is Carrie. I think the thing it programmatically also is it really reinforced, as Bradey called out, the whole building approach. So, a comprehensive partnership with these smaller customers to bring about a transformation in their building operation. A great example.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Bradey, do you want to move on to the numbers for the year?
Sure. So I talked a little bit about the high level numbers. Total therms achieved, 69% of goal. Interestingly, I think we actually finished, you see it there, just a little under in terms of dollars, incentivized dollars given to customers or paid to customers in 2020 versus 2019. Despite the lower return in terms of therms. So a lot of projects that had bigger impacts. We've seen I believe it was a slight increase in boilers in 2020. Again, we'll dive into all the numbers individually by measure. But yeah, you see the numbers there, and you see on the bottom the projection, what the program had expected. And you can kind of see right when that slowdown occurred and where the expectations started to level off a little bit in terms of what could be achieved or what would be achieved in 2020. In addition to boilers, insulation was again one of the bigger leaders in terms of measures for 2020. That's pretty consistent. This is by therms, not by dollars. So by therms achieved, the investment in, again, that it's not necessarily a whole building solution when it comes to boilers and insulation, but it's not just one measure and one measure type in terms of HVAC or weatherization that is driving the program, but it's a pretty good balance. We saw a big uptake on the energy saver kits in 2020. As Monica mentioned, the energy saver kit with the shower head and the bathroom aerator are no longer a part of the program as of February 1st, but the pre-rinse spray valve for kitchens, specifically in the restaurant industry, are and will be moving forward. We did a couple of promotions around both energy saver kits in 2020, which were very successful. Any questions on specific measures? Okay, we'll be talking a little bit about 2021 and some of the unique and different ways we're looking to approach the marketplace in 2021 moving forward, but that's it for the commercial side.
Thank you, Bradey. Any questions on commercial for right now? As Bradey mentioned, right after, I think it's pretty much right after we do the residential update, we'll talk about 2021's plans. Okay, I'm going to jump into residential. Please weigh in if you've got any questions. So on the residential program, the program saved about 380,000 therms. We did exceed our therms goal by about 16%. And over the 3-year average, we exceeded by about 6% compared to that 3-year average. We did have a pretty significant energy savers kit uptake in the summertime, but overall that equated to about 53,000 therms over our goal. As I mentioned earlier, we have a very significant queue for 2021 to start out with, about 60,000 therms just to start the year. So it's over 900, I think, right now. That includes both individual customers and some builder rebates that are carryovers from October as well. So we've got a robust start to the year. Very excited to be able to have a good kickoff for 2021. And just insight into December specifically, we averaged about 1,400 therms per day, and per week about 68 applications were paid. So there a question, Philip?
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to throw in that ESKs for 2020 represented just over 14,000 therms. So I wanted to point that out because ESKs, as was mentioned earlier, are no longer going to be a part of the program as of February 1st. So that's a factor to consider.
It is, and we do not typically have that type of uptake on our energy savers kits. I believe we talked about it last quarter, but that was mostly a response to a bill insert we'd sent in the summertime to customers looking for something during COVID that they could do to reduce their usage. That was low cost, no cost. We do recognize that the Regional Technical Forum has categorized the energy savers kits as not having any savings moving forward. So since they were still within our offerings for this year, we promoted them in direct response to COVID-19, and the response from the customer base was phenomenal, more than I've seen the whole time I've been with Cascade. So that was encouraging to be able to provide something to them to help with their energy use at no cost to them, and it did have an impact on our savings this year.
Well, and I would like to highlight that that's a direct result, I think, of the pandemic effect, right?
Exactly.
People are locked down and looking for any savings that they could get.
That's exactly it. Our response was because of the pandemic, and our offer was because of the pandemic, and their response was a direct result of it. I will say, the kits were there anyway, and we do advertise them periodically or had been advertising them periodically in bill inserts and are on the website. So the direct ask of customers to let us know really had a good impact. And I guess that's good from a perspective of us seeing what type of response or just readership we get on those bill inserts too. That was pretty telling. So. All right, so outside of the Energy Savers kits, you can see the program total in comparison to prior years. We did move to this 3-year average comparison versus just 2019 to 2020. We found that a little bit more telling holistically when you look at the programs on the health of the programs and the growth of the programs overall. You can see the 116%, we said 116% of goal. The incentive dollar amounts, we got about 78% of where we thought we might hit for incentives paid for the residential program. And then you can see the robust queue as well. The builder firms were pretty significant this year because we received a pretty big influx of builder incentives. I'm going to scroll down and I'll show you, I don't remember where it was. Well, this is where we hit goal actually, was in October. So that was really fun to be able to have hit goal and then to, continue with the processing to exceed our goal for the year on the residential side. Same thing there. Here's the builder spike I mentioned. So in October, and John may be a better one to weigh in on this since he's the one that's been working with the builders directly. We had a builder who had a significant number of homes that they had not yet applied for rebates on. So we did a push for them to be able to apply for those rebates. We have talked to them in the past. They're familiar with our programs. They help drive the higher efficiency updates. We wanted to make sure they could actually apply for those rebates. They kind of did it in mass. So we got hundreds of builder applications in October for homes that qualified for the program. So we're still weeding through those applications. We had to wait for some of the documentation from the contractors to confirm the installs, just to, due diligence. We want to make sure that they actually installed what they said they had. So we're still weeding through those. We're almost through the 2019 to pay those projects. We've got some more homes that were built in 2020. We're processing those through now as well. So that's what the spike is that you see in October. You can see throughout the rest of the year, though, we had a good portion of rebates. The red is 2020. So even with COVID, which we'll say is around April was lower, but then you see it's pretty equivalent when you go through May, and then June, it's even higher from last year. So we really did maintain the submissions this year, despite COVID. So it's really kind of the opposite of what you saw from the commercial side. It was a higher intake than we actually had the previous year as far as application submittals. And our builder program in this year, actually, we got about 1,131 applications from that. So it's about 29% of the total program submissions for the year were from new built homes. So that's part of my comment about we really need to evaluate with the building code going into effect in February, what kind of impact that's going to have on our programs, and what we can actually save based on whether those builders are putting in natural gas, high efficiency equipment, or sticking with the electric. So something to consider as we move throughout Q1 and Q2 and look at what that impact is. We also have here a breakout of the applications, how they were submitted to us. I'm sorry, Andrew, go ahead. Do you want me to go back up?
I was just going to ask a couple of quick questions about the builders. So this builder submitted the hundreds of applications in October. Were those buildings all actually built in 2020, or were they ones that he had somehow sat on for a while?
Some of them were 2019. Some of them were 2020. So part of what we said in 2020 to help some of these customers is if you had something that would qualify, you have not yet applied for it, you can apply for it. And this builder took us up on that. A lot of the homes are 2020 as well, so we're still processing those through. But yes, we did have some that were actually from 2019.
Okay. And then I'm curious to know, you had 29% of total program submissions were from the builder program. How does that compare to previous years?
I would have to defer to John.
In terms of previous years, I'm not exactly sure the proportion of applications received, but I know that builder applications typically make up about a third of, or about 30% of the therms that we get each year. So the last few years, it's been somewhere between the upper 20s and lower 30% of the therms that we pay. So I think it probably bears out on what we receive as well. And we do typically see an influx in the fall when builders have the building season is coming to a close, and so they have a bit more time to pivot towards applying for rebates. So we do usually see a spike. And yeah, so I'd have to look up the exact number, but it's about 30%, a third of what we get in a year.
That's a good point, John, and I forgot to mention this, and Robin actually did mention it to me as well. We didn't track the builder applications the same way in the past. We get one quote-unquote application from a builder, and there might have been like 40 homes on that single application. This year, we actually started tracking it by home on those applications. So I don't think it would be a like for like if we looked at it last year. So John's comparison is saying more the therms savings comparison to the program as a whole is probably more realistic.
Okay. And when you say a third of total therms saved, is that just for the residential program or the whole program?
It is for just the residential program. And Phil just sent me a good clarifying point. Historically, builders have contributed for about 20 to 25% of the total therms paid annually, and over the last couple of years, we've pushed that closer to around 30% now. I believe last year it did make up 30%. I'll need to go check that number.
Well, I think John's being modest. This year, John has done a lot of work around the builder program, and he has built it closer to 30% for 2020, which is one of the highest years that we have on record for builder program contribution. So I would like to do a little congratulatory to John.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, one thing we found, especially this year because of COVID, is it's hard to get some of these contractors to follow up on missing data. So when you're seeing the big time delay, like I was mentioning, the 2019 home, we typically would not entertain 2019 home applications past the 6 months when we ask the builder. Our standard program gives 90 days for customers to apply for a rebate. With the builders, we would typically give 6 months because it does take them longer to consolidate. They like to send them in mass, that kind of thing. With COVID, because of the delays in some of these building companies were actually closed, not for the good, March to about July or so. New construction building in Washington was postponed and or delayed or, completely disallowed. So because of that, a lot of these contractors were not able to get back with follow-up on that some of these were actually installed or confirmations. So we had to be a little bit flexible in some of our guidelines for getting that data to make sure that we actually did have it. So there is a delay because of that. And you'll see that also on the residential front. We did open the program to any applications for 2020. We didn't just stick to the 90 days. If it's been installed in 2020, submit it, and we're going to go ahead and process it through. Again, as a result of COVID, trying to pivot and support our customer base. And still, they're valid installs. They intended to apply. They just couldn't get the paperwork in for whatever reason. So we didn't want to have we didn't want that to be a barrier to the customers being able to receive their rebates. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move down then to what type of applications are made up throughout the year. You can see Robin pulled this together for us. So We get, obviously, snail mail, you get fax. We don't solicit emails, but we do get them anyway for rebate applications because of customer privacy. And then we've got, of course, point of sale, and we're going to have a point of sale update here in just a few minutes. You can see the builders total, and then the PUI is the public user interface. So that's through our website, as you can see what portions of each of those applications were submitted on the residential front. So it's nice to be able to have insight into that. And here's that big, the October is where you see that big builder influx of rebates. Not all of these were necessarily, some applications do end up getting disqualified or whatever. So not everything gets approved necessarily, but these are the actual installs. So, then we have our annual call log highlights. So it's been a different year, right? We used to solicit a lot more in-person conversations with customers and attend events and everything, and that didn't really happen this year. We pivoted to a remote model, as did most of our customer base. So I think the call log kind of reflects that as well. January, we had the highest number of incoming calls. Again, that was pre-COVID. And then July was the highest number of total calls. Likely, we had that ESK influx around July, so I think that has a big impact on that. It does differ from our incoming mail tracking, which typically peaks starting in October, so the high heating season. And then we did have quite a few improvements to our customer communication process as we worked through our what COVID looked like, right? How do we connect with those customers? We're returning calls within 24 hours, that kind of stuff. I'll stop there. I think Corey has a question.
Yeah, I do. Just wondering what exactly is the differentiation between incoming calls and total calls? What's the difference between that? What that would mean? Okay.
So Taylor, you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong here, but total calls includes outgoing calls. So we call to follow up with a customer. We need or even a trade ally. We need information on their rebate. We're returning. I don't know if it's returning a call specifically. Taylor, are you able to?
Yeah, I only heard the beginning of Corey's question. What's the difference between incoming calls and then what was the end?
The total calls.
Oh, total calls. Yep, outgoing, like you said, Monica, just for follow-up missing information. Sometimes we get emails from the concern box from customer service saying, hey, this person called us about the status. Can you give them a call back? So they didn't really initially call. We did the outgoing call. So those are just a few options for the outgoing calls, for total calls. Did that answer your question, Corey?
Yeah. That makes sense. I assumed that, but figured I'd clarify.
Yes, it's a good question.
Thank you, Corey. And you can see just a little more data here around the effects of, in April, our calls actually did go down significantly. You can see the overall decrease in calls as well. So we did continue to have program participation. We just didn't see as many calls as we would have seen the previous year. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just, you may have just hit on it, but I guess I was looking at this when I glanced through the agenda yesterday and just kind of trying to figure out maybe what the big takeaway from this call data is. I mean, I think it's interesting. Like I said, I was trying to figure out what we as CAG members should be really taking away from it.
Yeah, it's a good point, Andrew. Taylor, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah. For what I was just trying to show with this was just kind of the ebbs and flows of the year. Sorry if you hear a 2-year-old yelling in the background. But I wanted to show the kind of how Monica pointed out the difference of how our calls were kind of peaking in the summer and then teetered off in the winter, which is kind of different than our incoming mail tracking sheet. And then I think we may get into the types of calls, like the pre-purchase versus the pre-application calls, which is just people calling with their install already done and want to apply or have it installed and have some questions. But from the full call analysis, just the kind of what we're working with and the trends, and to show like the status is how we kind of got it down in the winter months. But mostly just the trends, I guess, is the takeaway that I wanted from it.
Yeah. And this is Carrie. I think another thing that we mentioned last year is that because we're remote, our process changed to ask the customer to, if they called, the voice message said, if you leave them your contact information, we will return your call, which of course would then bump up the number of return calls versus incoming calls. In addition, also inviting them to use email to contact us. And so there is a non-call supported customer activity going on as well that is via email now. Just some context.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move on from the call data. If you do want specifics, like Taylor does have a breakout of the different types of calls that we get. I'm sorry, Taylor, I didn't include it here because there's just so much data.
I know.
But we do have a breakout of, the types of calls. Incoming calls constitute, status updates and pre-application questions and just basic information about the program as a whole. So we certainly do track that data and are more than happy to follow up with anyone who's interested.
Thanks, Monica.
Okay, thank you. So I think I'm going to move into the Commercial Industrial Adaptive Management Plan. We do have a little less than an hour left, so we're going to talk about our process there. We're going to talk about the point of sale briefly, and then I think the Cascade internal eM&V, that could be about a 2-minute discussion for right now, and then our low-income discussion with Alyn and Sheila. So let's jump Bradey into our adaptive management plan for our Re-Covery.
Sure. So thank you, first of all, for to Philip for starting this conversation during our quarterly meeting with the TRC and CNG folks. We're always looking for creative ways to adopt new strategies, tactics, and so on, as far as how to, work with the marketplace to get the promotion of incentives, but also really to have a deep impact on therm saved and energy efficiency. And Philip brought up in our quarterly meeting, what types of unique outside the box creative approaches are we looking at? And we had some ideas, but as a group, we all came together and our big, I think it was actually Carrie who branded it Re-Covery, but which I thought was brilliant. So again, not knowing how long and how deep the impacts for COVID restrictions will go on. Philip talked a little bit about that. Could be end of the summer, could be longer, who knows? But one of the approaches we want to look at is reaching out to customers under the 50,000 square foot size, as we discussed earlier, are impacted by the Clean Buildings Initiative, but under the 50,000 square foot, but really looking at those customers who are small business, who have been deeply impacted by COVID, maybe some businesses that have gone out of business and new investors have come in. How can we incentivize them to look at an energy efficient approach? So this Re-Covery idea has several elements. The biggest and most impactful, I think, is for any customer who completes 3 measures, they don't have to be three different measure types, but three measures. So a water heater, insulation, and a boiler. Two boilers and a water heater, three furnaces, what have you. Whatever investment customers make, as long as there are three measures, we're proposing a 10% increase in terms of the incentives for those customers. So that's part of our recovery, so to speak. We believe this will impact this would not impact and most likely would not be schools, which traditionally do more than three measures, whether it's new construction or renovation, as they are typically larger than 50,000 square feet. But looking at some customers who have done projects in the past, this is not necessarily a deep impact. I think we determined there were a half dozen customers each of the last 2 years who would have received these incentives. We're looking to, add to that, potentially even double that. So our layered cake artistry, which was the case study that we discussed earlier for the December holiday message, they would be a perfect example of this, where they made an investment in food service equipment, they made an investment in their water heater, and they made an investment in insulation for their building. So we'd be looking at reaching out to customers and offering them this incentive, this increase in the incentive for 2021 and potentially beyond, but starting with 2021. So there are some other components to the recovery, but I wanted to just kind of give the quick overview of that first portion. One other sector would be point of sale, and that's that while the commercial program does not typically have as much uptake on the point of sale, where contractors give the incentive to the customer at the time of purchase, we wanted to create a fund or something where we can more quickly process the incentives so that contractors can offer this and be confident that they're going to get their money in a relatively quick turnaround from a incentive perspective from the program. So those are the two big elements. I'll talk a little bit about the sectors, how we plan to outreach it, what the marketplace looks like, and the financial impact, but wanted to give you the kind of those two main components. Are there any questions specifically around those two things?
I don't think so at the moment. I think you answered the main one I was thinking about with the three measure bundles, which was how many people have typically done three measures at a time. So
yeah, it's pretty. It's a pretty small list. It's a really small list if you look at three different measure types, and that's why we thought it might be limiting it a little bit to just do measure types, so that somebody would have to do not just three furnaces, but a furnace and a water heater and food service equipment or what have you. So so as you can imagine, one of the biggest impacted sectors would be restaurants. They will be a primary focus of this, and we've done a lot of outreach to restaurants in 2020 per COVID impacts, but want to continue that outreach. We also look at churches, manufacturing facilities, other small businesses, such as we've talked a little bit about, the auto industry, whether that's a tire shop or a mechanic, something like that. So how we're going to outreach to those businesses is going to be multi layered. We're going to have some Google search advertising, which we've seen success in the past. Local newspaper advertisements, more than likely digital, through their digital website. We've done this. We did this a little bit in 2020 and are going to continue that, but with the recovery message in 2021, and potentially partnering with local chambers of commerce to promote and support businesses that support the chamber through that. So that's going to be kind of our outreach group. As we talked about, the marketplace I think is ripe for this, and we I won't say the name of the restaurant, but there's a restaurant in Bellingham that recently has gone under, and we kind of use that as our model of, unfortunately, they went under. However, the expectation is at some point somebody's going to come in and purchase that place, so that space, and there's no better time to reach them and offer our incentives than when there's a change in ownership. So because they could be looking for investment, and we're trying to assist in making that investment less impactful. Obviously, it's going to be a deep impact if they're replacing a bunch of equipment, fixing the shell of the building, changing out food service equipment, things like that. So I don't want to have a pie in the sky image of how exactly this is going to work, and that we have one particular type of customer, but I do think there's there's some customers we have in mind for this outreach and for this market. So Monica, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the financial impact and the funding at this point, or if it's something that we can talk about later. But
well, let me just introduce it, and then it really is going to be more of a dive in later in the year, to be honest, or within the next couple months. So one thing that Cascade had researched in the past is financing for upgrades. When we had looked into it previously, many other utilities do it. There is on-bill financing. There's lots of different options. On-bill financing is tricky for Cascade. We have explored it in the past, and I'm not saying it can't be done, but it is something that's quite involved with all of our partner utilities as well within the MDU family, because it would affect our customer care and billing system. So having said that, we know it's not impossible, but we looked at that and said, okay, so if we don't look at specifically on-bill financing, what are some other options for financing for our customers? And of course, one of them is partnering with financial institutions to offer financing to customers. We found in the past that a lot of our trade allies actually offered financing options. So for us to do it as well, it was kind of doubling up, and there wasn't a big demand for it. We're looking at whether, considering effects of COVID, if those trade allies are still actually able to offer that financing, how robust that network is, and if there's more of a demand from customers for financing. So, and really we focused more on the residential front in the past. So we would like to explore whether there is enough of a robust financing option right now available for commercial, industrial, and potentially residential. So one of the things we're looking at is surveying our trade ally network to see if they offer financing still. If they do, what type of financing they offer to customers. We find that there is a gap. We are considering growing out and researching financial institutions that we can work with to offer some financing to our customers on our behalf. So we haven't gotten very far down that road, but it's something that we certainly are looking at, and we're going to do a little more research to see how we can support it. If the demand is really there. I think that the demand is. I don't know, and without knowing, we got to dig into it. So I think that was it from me on the financing part, Bradey.
I appreciate that introduction. It sounds like it's certainly a interesting avenue to explore. One question about on-bill financing. So you said that it would be tricky to try and implement. Be something, and I think you said it had to do with the customer billing system. Does Cascade have its own customer billing system, or do you just kind of like use something the same thing that all of MDU companies use? I guess I'm wondering, like, if Cascade tried to do on bill, would like all of MDU have to do on bill, or what?
Cascade uses the same Oracle system that the rest of MDU uses. It's customer care and billing. And for us to ask for a change, it does affect the entire system. So I have not talked to them directly recently. I know we explored it in the past because I think Oregon wanted us to look at viability and feasibility for doing on-bill financing. I remember the conversations being that it was very, very cumbersome. So that, like I said, it's not that it can't be done. It's certainly not something that we could say, hey, can you do this? And they could do it a day. It would be quite involved, but I do know the system is capable of it.
Okay, understood. Thanks.
So the one last piece that I'll get into is a food service drawing, and this is something that we're still exploring, but looking at doing in probably Q2, and that's a drawing to promote our trade allies in the food service industry, trade allies and non-trade allies, but our contractors who we typically work with, and again to promote the restaurant business, doing a new fryer as part of a drawing for an energy efficient fryer, so Energy Star, and a fryer that's specifically for customers who enter the drawing. This is something that one of our employees on the commercial industrial side has discussed, and we've talked pretty in depth about what it would look like and how we would promote it. Again, we're not married to any one thing, and this is where, maybe not necessarily in this call, but as a follow-up, we would invite any feedback from any other CAG members. But we're just looking at trying to be creative and come up with unique ways to, by no means capitalize on the current situation, but understand the situation that a lot of our customers are in and figure out how we can best assist and promote their move towards energy efficiency and, you know, having a less of an impact on, you know, obviously their bottom line, but also on the environment. So I think that's about it. As I mentioned, and maybe Monica has different thoughts, but this is not we don't necessarily have to dive into other ideas that folks have. If others have ideas, please, by all means, share them. But this can be something that is ongoing, and we'll revisit certainly in quarterly meetings, but moving forward as the year progresses, we are happy to take any and all impacts or thoughts on how we can have an impact with the marketplace. So.
I have a thought that is just escaping my brain. So I had a thought earlier in the call, and I can't remember which comment it was that kind of spurred it. But for either Bradey or Monica, has there been any kind of, I don't know, renewed pushes for partnerships among utilities to look at either dual fuel buildings or just like partnership between gas utilities to try and do various efficiency things on the natural gas side as kind of an adaptive management thing as we, again, head into 2021?
You know, we're actually leveraging the HB 1257 compliance to have some of those conversations, Andrew. Not specifically on the rebate offerings, but how can our programs better align and leverage joint efforts? So I think it's an introduction into that. I'll let Bradey weigh in on what he's seeing as well, but I can add a little bit more too.
Yeah, so we made some changes in 2020 in alignment with other, we share a joint food service incentive application with 7 other utilities around the state, but mostly around the Puget Sound region. And we have adopted, you know, some changes that they have made, not in terms of tariff offerings, but in terms of promotional materials and things like that. And we'll continue to do that with that food service group. In addition, we have conducted some joint walkthroughs in the past, and he had done some early in 2020, before obviously walkthroughs were, you know, discouraged, to put it nicely. So we're going to continue to do that. That's been with BPA. We have joint discussions regularly with PSE on maybe not so much in terms of dual fuel, but in terms of how a business that comes to either an energy advisor group, energy conservation group, or a particular contractor, trade ally, what have you. We work with other utilities regularly, and we'll continue that push. It's top of mind constantly. We reference it and keep track of it as the year goes on, and we'll continue to. But I think that the opportunity for in-person visits with other utilities, as those become more regular again, I think you will see a significant increase in that.
That's good to know.
Okay. Yeah, always looking for those opportunities, Andrew, honestly, especially as we're encountering similar barriers and hurdles right now. There's been a lot of discussions at the regional level and just utility to utility. And I think Kris's efforts right now are really helping us build those networks. Absolutely. Is there anything else for Bradey? I think we might jump into the residential point of sale update. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and switch what I'm sharing here, which is going to be our residential update. Kris, do you want to walk through this?
Sure, and I'll keep it brief. Looks like we have about half hour left. So what Monica is sharing is just the highlights of how our point of sale program with contractors in the residential realm is working out. Total to date, so from inception in 2019 to 2020, we've had 339 submissions with 14 contractors. The rebate submissions per month graph shows like it didn't really trend in any way. I think COVID kind of pushed it off. Had COVID not happened, the beginning of the year in 2020 was off to a really high start. And then it dropped off as projects halted for a lot of contractors. And then in the summer, I think a lot of the projects that were in progress got to finish, and there was a spike in submission. And then through the year, it's just kind of stayed steady as an up and down over the summer for submissions. But we did submit more, or we had more submissions this year than last year by 59 more rebates, and 2 additional contractors signed up for 2020. And then the graph below, the contractors per year, that just shows of the contractors that are participating, how many submitted 2019 versus 2020, and the majority have picked up in their submissions for the year. So as the program continues and their sales staff become increasingly familiar with our process and remember to include this as an offering, I believe that we will continue to see growth in this. And then just a couple points, on average, from the time that a contractor submits their rebate application to the time they get a check either electronically or in the mail, it's about 2 to 3 weeks. So we have been able to consistently stay under that 4-week window that we promised them. And especially during 2020, that was important as funding was a little more inconsistent, and contractors didn't want to float a balance as long. And that was also in the next point, kind of why there weren't more contractors that signed up this year. While it is a voluntary program, and contractors are not required to offer instant rebates if they participate. There was still some hesitance with how the middle of the year and the pandemic went. So I'm hoping that in 2021, as hopefully things kind of go back to a 2019 norm for business as usual, then we'll see more contractors willing to offer this in different ways and have a more steady business model to float those balances a little better. But any questions? All right, thank you.
That was great. Thank you, Kris. Greatly appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing that, and I think I'll go back to our agenda. Should be seeing the agenda now. So I just want to touch base real quick on Cascade's internal eM&V plan and timeline for 2021. As we've prefaced for the last couple of years, Nexent was building in an internal eM&V element into their software package. When I say Nexent, that was widely driven by Cascade and a lot of thought leadership from Cascade as well. So with that, under that umbrella, we've gone through quite a few ebbs and flows with Nexent to get it up and running. It is now available to Cascade. We are starting the process of what it looks like to actually do a more thorough, you'll notice the little E, the large M, the large V. That's our way of indicating, and this is kind of supported from Nexent, that this is not external evaluation, measurement, and verification. It's internal. We recognize that. It's essentially a placeholder for third-party evaluation, measurement, and verification, which we know is going to be, down the line for our programs. Likely planning for, we're looking at the biennial. We'll have to look at what that looks like. In the meantime, we really want to have some internal review of our savings assumptions, and our software through Nexent should be able to support that. It's also going to be a survey of customers who have participated in the program. Of course, the customer base is looked at, we have to create the control group, of course, and I'm trying to remember the specifics we have on it. Carrie, you're going to have to rescue me if I misstate here, but we've got, is it a year pre and post install? What are some of the other criteria we're looking for?
Yeah, we're looking at accounts where there has been a full 12 months of usage pre-installation, as well as a full 12 months post-installation, so that we're able to do a regression analysis to look at what the slope of the usage is before the installation, and what we would predict it to be, without that energy efficiency solution versus what the actual was. We know that we're under constraints in terms of the statistical sample size, and a lot of projects will fall out because of the fact that households have changed. In fact, that's one of the largest factors with COVID, right? We might have that pre-installation information, but that was based on everyone leaving the house in the morning to go to school and work, and now it's very likely that in a lot of households they're home all the time. So there's a survey instrument that we're going to ask Kris to apply with these eligible households to ask some constant questions, so that we can eliminate as much variability as possible when we're looking at the results. It's just an effort to remove some of the noise. So we'll be asking about whether they've changed, the household has changed, whether the occupancy has changed, if they've made any changes in the remodeling, and then we hope at this level, at Cascade's level, in Washington, we won't have a large sample size, but we will look at 100%, or we hope to look at 100% of the results, so that we can make some, we can glean some information about the trends, and then the trends would then be taken to the third party for additional drill down to understand what those savings are attributable to. And we also, we know that there's an interactive element if there's equipment and in installation, and so that would also cause those projects to drop out.
Thank you, Carrie. And that will, we're hoping our internal review throughout quarter, really coming up with the plan in quarter one, engaging in that survey that Carrie was mentioning in quarter two, and then being able to provide feedback to the CAG and inform our conservation planning process as well. So that's our plan for the eM&V for now. I'm not hearing any comments, so looks like we have about 23 minutes left. I know we have a bullet here on brainstorming opportunities. Alyn, I think, do we just want to go ahead and shelve that for a little bit later when we can get, see if we can have Commerce on the phone with us?
Yeah, we can. I can just touch on it very briefly to say that part of my job as manager of energy efficiency policy is to keep apprised for opportunities to partner with various nonprofit and government entities moving toward deeper energy efficiency. And so when we looked at the Department of Commerce's state energy strategy, there were a few pathways forward with natural gas expanding into some interesting areas, deeper energy efficiency, solar assisted gas, water, heat, and things of that nature. And so we know that the Department of Commerce has a representative that's able to participate on our CAG. And so we've just invited them to attend future meetings. We would love to have them at the table. And we see an opportunity there for us to expand brainstorming in partnership with our advisory group to better understand what Commerce's provisions might look like, or their recommendations, and how we might be able to explore that further with this group. And so obviously that's not something we want to dig into today, but I did just want to put it on the radar that that is certainly something that we're interested in terms of looking at their recommendations in terms of expanded energy efficiency opportunities and seeing how we can dovetail that with our existing efforts. And then I can, if there's not any questions, I can move into our low-income weatherization discussion. All right.
I think Robin's got a question, Alyn.
I do. Sorry about that. Would you like me to put an action item on for you guys to reach out to Andrew and the group for a different meeting for brainstorming?
I was imagining that's going to be as part of future CAG discussions. We were encouraging the Department of Commerce to have their representative participate here so that they can get a sense of the work that we're doing with the advisory group and some of our existing efforts to figure out ways to expand. So I think once we have the commerce representative on board, that'll probably open up some natural opportunities for us if there's a need for later breakout. But I'd say for now, we just look forward to having them at the table as part of our regular meetings and seeing where the discussion takes us.
Okay, thank you, Alyn.
Yep, no problem. All right, so we have our preliminary results for CY 2020. 45 projects were completed, 177 measures. We spent just under 700,000 in incentives. Total EWIP was about 556,000. Of that, there was an additional project coordination indirect rate expenditure of about 137,000. Looking at project costs for the year, they were about 15,000 on average for project costs. We understand that there's additional expenses associated with managing weatherization during COVID. We just appreciate the work of our agencies in these unprecedented times to be able to do the good job that they're doing. So we recognize the additional effort that they're putting in and some of the increases to costs associated with some of the health and safety, COVID training, the fact that a lot of the agencies, they've noted that they have reduced federal funding, and so they've become more, they've reached out to us more for funds from our program to be able to keep things floating and moving on. And also, we found that some of our agencies have given feedback that they're able to move past the low-hanging fruit and serve homes that may have deeper energy retrofit needs in order to get them to where they need to be. And so we just appreciate the work that they're doing to reach our most vulnerable customers, and certainly want to continue to encourage it. The lowest reimbursement for the year was $348. That was just for a small one-off. Highest reimbursement, and we're getting ready to pay on it, was just under 41 grand. We did ask for that project for just some additional review, which is why we haven't paid on it yet. But I think we did approve that now, and we'll be moving forward. We just because of the level of rebate that was requested for that project, we just wanted to take one more look through that rebate application and get a letter from the agency breaking out why the expenses were a little bit higher. And I think in that case, like I said, that was a project where the home was nearly a walk away. The customer was in a no heat situation, and they had to make some substantial repairs in order to be able to weatherize that home. And from our understanding, the customer was deeply appreciative. They were in a fairly precarious situation. I mean, obviously, we want to be mindful of costs, and that's one of the things that I'll want to discuss with the advisory group today is when we do see projects significantly over the average. I mean, obviously, we want to do everything we can to support our customers while being good fiduciary stewards. So, just a question for the group today is there a threshold at which we automatically do a little bit of a deeper dig, maybe request a letter from the agency, just as we have in this case? Are we comfortable with some of these reimbursements being a little bit higher? We certainly are, as long as, the CAG is and our regulators are, and, it's serving, whole home, low income weatherization. And so I'm not really so much concerned by the cost as just making sure that, we're just being mindful of being good fiduciary stewards, doing our due diligence, and I will just open it up very quickly to the group to discuss if there is a threshold at which we do want to have a deeper formal review, or or at the very least a letter from our agency to detail that expense.
So I guess my high level feedback is I don't know if there is a specific threshold that I personally would have in mind. I do appreciate Cascade certainly doing that due diligence, and here's what I would say. If you want to propose a specific threshold, I might that might be a little bit easier for me to digest, I guess. But yeah, otherwise, I do appreciate you doing some additional due diligence on this $41,000 project, for instance. So yeah, I might kind of just let this one be one of those where whenever your spidey sense tingles a little bit and says maybe we need to look into this a little more, that might be good enough.
Yep, and I think that's fine by us. I think it's probably going to be maybe, if it's significantly above average project cost, or like with this project, I think it was 40,000, or just under 41,000, but that was with the additional 10% project admin cost and those pieces. And so I think if a project comes in before that additional adder is put on and we see a raw cost in that range, we probably will ask for some additional review just to make sure that everything's looking good. We've got a lot of faith in our agencies. I think it always makes sense to do a little bit of due diligence. So just making sure that the CAG was aware that sometimes we are seeing projects. I think especially, in the era of COVID, we're seeing higher cost projects. The agencies certainly, they don't want to walk away from a home if they can help it. So it's not an everyday expense, but occasionally there are projects where we see those higher thresholds. So, just something to think about. And then, I just kind of floating this idea. We'd certainly want to dig deeper into it, but looking at what that expense was, this was a stick-built home, but I'm wondering if in the case of, a similarly situated modular or mobile home, if at some point, there's a cost threshold like this where it may make more sense for us to support replacement with maybe a high efficiency natural gas mobile. And so just something to think about in future, floating it out there as we start to get to these higher price points, if we want to look at mobile home replacement or something of that nature down the road. All right, let's see. We had our meeting with our agencies in December. It looks like they're in pretty good shape. They're all being impacted, of course, by COVID and the restrictions at the beginning of last year and being able to enter homes. I think with all the barriers to being able to serve low-income homes this year, the number of homes that were served is significant, and we certainly appreciate it. We did get a request from our agencies. We asked if there was anything we could do to help them to continue their successful reach of our customers. One request was for support of COVID training reimbursement. And so like I had mentioned before, there's additional requirements in homes now. I believe there's some COVID training for the homeowner, before they go into the home. But also, I think there's some training that they have to do with their contractors. That's my understanding. So in those cases where we're looking at training that's taking place before a contractor is entering a home, I see that as a little bit separate from, the weatherization project itself. Even though it's tangentially health and safety, it gets a little bit fuzzier because that's work being performed outside the home prior to the project being completed. And so something that I thought we might be able to do that would be fairly easy would be to reallocate some of the $20,000 outreach funds that we set aside to still allow for program outreach, but also to provide it as funds for training reimbursement for situations where contractors do need or their staff do need additional training associated with COVID or other related needs, where they can come to us, explain what the nature of the training is. We pre-approve, they do the training, and then we reimburse them out of that fund. Are there any concerns with that approach?
Probably not. Do you have like a ballpark idea of how much these trainings cost?
Oh, we can confirm that. Sean, are you on the call?
Oh, I don't think
I'm on the call.
Do you have a sense of what those trainings look like cost-wise? I mean, we can certainly confirm that, but do you have any ballpark?
I don't know what trainings we're referring to here, so I don't have an answer to that.
No problem. We can confirm that with our agencies. But it was something they were interested in, is being able to get reimbursed for COVID-related contractor training.
Okay.
And just as a note, in 2020, I don't believe any of our agencies reached out to us for marketing funds. And so, you know, I'm not sure what that's going to look like in 2021. I think some of them may be interested in doing some outreach, particularly, you know, as we get into a situation later in the year where maybe we're starting to see lessened impacts of COVID. But for now, it did seem like there was an interest from our agencies, and if, you know, as long as those funds are there for them using it for those trainings. So yeah, we can follow up with that and get a sense of what that looks like. But I would say that using funds like that would be consistent with how we operate our Trade Ally program on the regular residential commercial side of our program, where we have funds set aside for co-branded marketing or for relevant training. So.
Okay. I guess that sounds reasonable then.
Yep. Let's see. And then next, travel expense documentation and projects, spread across measures or line item. Yeah, we're just trying to figure out how best to account for expenses that accrue to the project in total, but aren't related to any one specific measure. Especially, you know, if we're looking at, you know, treat modeling, you know, we want to make sure that, you know, we're you know, the way costs are assigned, project level costs are assigned in a way that just recognizes that it's part of the total installed cost of the project. But, you know, we want to figure out how that's just counted in terms of, you know, valuation of the project as a whole. And so, you know, I just want to make sure, you know, should we be separating out for costs that are necessary to completion of a weatherization project, but aren't related to one specific weatherization measure? How would we like to see that broken out? And so we can either just take it and we can spread it across all of the measures for the purposes of calculating cost effectiveness. You just divide it evenly out. Or we can break it out as a separate line item on our rebate application form. I was curious if anyone had a preference on that.
I guess to me, it would probably make more sense to have it as a separate line item.
And Alyn, this is Sean. So is this the continued conversation about how one bill included some overnight stay for a project and the travel associated with that? Because I mean, you know, the way I am, when you get a bill for work completed by a contractor, I mean, there's essentially the measures and then there's time and materials. And so, you know, I would consider this expense as time and materials related. So, you know, it's not clear to me what the problem is and what the solution is trying to fix here, because you know what has been happening here, and then you know what is asked to be changed moving forward.
And I'll let Sheila jump in since this is something that she's been working with directly, and her hand was up.
I would say, Sean, that the rub is that the tariff doesn't have a line item for an ancillary cost of lodging if a contractor has to stay for a few days at at a remote site. This is specifically with the Aberdeen district, and they don't have any contractors there, so Richard is doing the work based out of Vancouver, Washington, and when they present the invoice, it says this is, you know, how many nights and days of lodging we needed to keep our staff in proximity to finish the job.
So I mean, the way I'm seeing this is, I mean, that's part of the bid for the job. I mean, if they say, okay, we're gonna, you know, if it's a time and materials job or a bid job, I mean, like, that's part of doing the work. If you have to hire somebody to come in and do the work and they're coming in from out of town, part of the expense of the project is, you know, if they're there for 2 days, you know, if it's feasible, they're going to drive back and forth and potentially charge that, you know, so I mean, it's, you know, it's part of the cost of the work. You know, I think the question is, you know, are we, like, the level of specificity that we're requesting from contractors to do the work, you know, that is a non-measure cost, and so that should be part of the cost of the project. I don't necessarily know that, like, we want to be reviewing mileage sheets for contractors doing this work. You know, it's essentially like the level of specificity.
No, it's nothing like that. No, it's just it's kind of it can be a $1,200-$1,500 cost for a project to have 2 crew members stay remotely in order to complete the project. So I think the question is, since we don't have a line item on our tariff, we only pay for discrete measures that are completed. Like, is it best to work with the contractor to get the invoice to reflect the lodging and travel as distributed across all the work completed, or this?
Yeah, I mean, having the utility get into the role of working on what the contractor, you know, essentially contract management of contractors that go through a process managed by the agencies is, I mean, I think that's a lot of cooks in the kitchen here. I mean, if the concern is it's a disallowable expense, then that just needs to be communicated to the agency that's not an allowable expense, and then the contractor and the agency just need to figure that out.
We're not saying
and Sean,
it's
just to be clear, this is actually the opposite of that. We want to get them paid. It's just that our current rebate application form and tariff aren't entirely clear on how those costs should be distributed. So when we see it in the invoice, we're not thinking, you know, oh, darn, we don't want to pay that. It's the opposite of, yes, we recognize, just as you do, Sean, that it's part of doing business. We're not trying to get into the weeds here. We're just trying to roll it in a regulatorily appropriate way into our rebate application form so that we can acknowledge that expense. Now, if it's built into the contract and not broken out separately, you know, if it's just part of the total cost and it's in there, built into the meat of it somewhere, we're not going to notice. We're not asking them to break it out. We reimburse. But a lot of times when we're seeing the invoices that are coming in from our agencies, that travel is in some way broken out. So we're just figuring out how best to account for it in the sheet so we can get them paid, just to be clear. And then I saw that Andrew had his hand raised. I think Monica did as well.
So I'm cognizant of the fact that it's now 12:01 and that I actually have a noon that I need to be starting to move towards. Because you're talking about this not being in your tariff, Alyn, the first thing that I'm wondering is, do we need a tariff tweak? And I don't know if that's really the best avenue to go about fixing this problem. I might need to think about this a little more and glance at the tariff and see if there's something that needs to be done there before kind of really weighing in on this. I could also just defer to Sean. Sean is probably more knowledgeable about this type of thing than I am right now. So.
Yeah, let's just follow up offline on this, and then we can have a conversation about what's most effective here for a solution.
Sounds good.
And I think Corey has a question, Alyn.
Yeah, more of a comment than a question. I guess the point that you had made, Alyn, about seeing it as a cost of doing business is kind of the way I think of it. And I know that this isn't an exact parallel because there's differences between it, but I can think of when we do contracts with public counsel, when we contract with experts, we include cost of travel within the contract number. So I think that your point that you had made about whether you would just include that in the contract to do business with the contractor to perform the measure installations, that might be a way to think about it. But if this conversation needs to be taken offline, that's that might also be appropriate as well.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I think there's
feedback.
I think there's an action item there, Robin, for Alyn and Sheila to follow up with Sean, and then we'll circle back with the CAG on how we'll be accounting for those costs. And as Alyn stated, it's not a question of if, it's how best to account for them on our tracking side, not even on the agency's tracking side, but we just want to make sure that it's appropriately accounted for on our side.
I got that, Monica. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Alyn. I think that's it for that part of it. I just want to draw everyone's eye to the quarterly meeting schedule. Robin has already sent out those invites. We're planning on Teams in Q2, Q3, maybe the commission offices. That's TBD. And of course, Andrew will let us know what that looks like. And then we have our Bellingham or Teams meeting Q4, depending on what COVID is like. So
I would probably say we're looking at either Teams or somewhere else for July.
Okay, that's fair. All right, so I think that's it for our meeting. I do want to be respectful. I realize it's afternoon. So thank you everyone so much for your participation. Please send any questions you have along. We're probably looking at about a 3-week turnaround for the notes because we are trying for this new format of record keeping for the meeting, but we will, prior to that in the next week, send out the action items so that we make sure we can get a timely start on those. So, any final questions, comments before we wrap up?
Nope, just appreciate all the info and questions and everything.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for your participation as always. I really appreciate it, and this makes it so valuable to be able to really have this conversation. I'm sure we could fill up another couple hours, but I won't do that this time. I'll let you go, and again, thank you for participating. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good afternoon.